morning light barely broke over the horizon as Jacob stood at the helm of the marina's edge, a weathered fishing boat that had been in his family for generations. The salty air filled his lungs, and the sound of the waves lapping against the hull was a familiar comfort. He had spent most of his life on these waters, navigating the intricate dance between man and the sea. But this season felt different, an unsettling tension in the air that he couldn't quite place. Jacob had decided to take the boat out for one last trip before winter. The fish were still running, and he hoped to fill the hold with enough catch to see him through the cold months. As he cast off the lines and maneuvered away from the dock, he thought of his late father, who had taught him everything he knew about fishing. The old man's voice echoed in his mind, cautioning him about the dangers lurking beneath the surface. Jacob shrugged off the feeling, attributing it to his own unease about being alone. The day dragged on with the rhythmic routine of fishing. He anchored in a spot his father had once called the honey hole, casting his nets and checking the lines. Hours passed, and the sky darkened with ominous clouds, churning like the depths below. The air grew heavier, charged with electricity, and a chill settled in his bones despite the still warm October breeze. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Jacob gathered his nets, pulling in a surprisingly bountiful catch. He felt a flicker of joy, perhaps it was a sign from his father. He worked quickly, storing the fish in ice-filled bins, when a strange sound broke through the wind, a low, mournful wail that sent shivers up his spine. It was unlike anything he had ever heard, a haunting melody that seemed to resonate from the very depths of the ocean. Shaking off the chill, he chalked it up to the wind playing tricks on him. But the wail grew louder, more insistent. It beckoned him, pulling at something deep within. He hesitated, peering into the inky black water, searching for its source. His heart raced as he imagined a creature rising from the depths, something primal and ancient. Ignoring the sound, he returned to his tasks, but it lingered in his mind, an unshakable shadow. Night enveloped the boat, and he lit the lanterns, their flickering flames barely illuminating the vast emptiness around him. He prepared a simple meal, but his appetite had vanished. Instead, he focused on the rhythmic rocking of the boat, hoping to soothe his nerves, but sleep evaded him. Hours dragged on as the wailing transformed into whispers, faint, barely audible, yet chilling. They seemed to call his name, each syllable laden with sorrow. Jacob tried to drown them out by tuning the radio, but the static morphed into a cacophony of voices, overlapping and chaotic, urging him to listen. He felt a weight on his chest, suffocating and heavy. Just before dawn, Jacob made a decision. He would head back to shore, feeling an overwhelming sense of dread creeping in. He packed up his gear, his hands trembling as he worked. The whispering intensified, the voices clear now, forming words he couldn't quite comprehend. Panic surged within him as he glanced overboard, the water swirling ominously, a dark abyss reflecting his fear. With the engine roaring to life, he set a course for home. But the sea was restless, waves crashing against the boat, tossing it like a toy. The storm had come quickly, dark clouds swirling above, blocking out the stars. Rain began to pelt down in sheets, blinding him to the horizon. He fought against the steering wheel, his knuckles white, trying to keep the boat steady. And then he saw a figure standing at the edge of the boat, drenched in rainwater. The figure was a woman, her long hair dripping, her eyes hollow and void of life. She raised her hand, beckoning him closer. Jacob's breath caught in his throat. It was as if the sea itself had manifested her, a specter born of the ocean's depths. "Come to me," she whispered, her voice a blend of the wind and the waves, resonating deep within him. "You belong with us." Terror struck him, and he fought the urge to approach. He remembered his father's stories, tales of sailors lost to the sea, lured by sirens promising peace and eternal rest. Jacob steered the boat hard to port, his heart pounding as he tried to escape the haunting presence. The storm raged, but the figure remained, an anchor in the chaos, drawing nearer with each crash of the waves. Jacob could feel her pull, the weight of despair sinking into his soul. He pushed the throttle to the limit, the boat screaming against the fury of the sea. As dawn broke, a pale light spilled across the water, illuminating the storm's devastation. The figure stood just a few feet away, her face twisted in sorrow, the embodiment of loss. Jacob could feel her anguish, the weight of those who had drowned, who had never returned to the surface. "Let go," she urged, her voice softening, almost tender. Join us. We can free you from this burden. In that moment, clarity hit him like a wave. He realized that she was not a threat, but a guardian of those who had been lost to the depths. Jacob's heart ached for them, for the souls forever trapped beneath the waves, and for the first time, he understood their sorrow. "No," he cried, tears streaming down his face. "I won't abandon my life." With the last surge of strength, he turned the boat away from her, heading straight into the rising sun. The storm began to dissipate, the wind dying down as he left the figure behind. She watched, her face a mask of grief, until she finally vanished into the mist, the whispers fading into silence. Jacob returned to shore, exhausted but alive. He docked the boat, the familiar sounds of the harbor a stark contrast to the night's horrors. As he unloaded the fish, he felt a profound emptiness, a void where fear once resided. The ocean had shown him its depths, its sadness, and he knew that he would never forget the woman who had tried to take him into the depths of despair. From that day on, Jacob could hear the whispers when the winds rose, a reminder of those lost beneath the waves. He continued to fish, but the joy had faded, replaced by a deep-seated respect for the ocean's power. Each journey became a tribute to those who had vanished, a promise that their stories would never be forgotten. And sometimes, on the quietest nights, when the moonlight danced upon the water, he would stand at the edge of the boat, listening to the soft echoes of their calls and eternal connection to the depths he had narrowly escaped. The sea breeze creaked and groaned like an old man, its wooden hull weathered by countless storms and seasons spent at sea. Alex had inherited the fishing boat from his father, who had passed just a year earlier, leaving behind not only the vessel but also the weight of expectation. Alex was determined to keep the family tradition alive, spending long days in the sun and salt water, chasing fish and escaping the ghosts of his past. Living alone on the sea breeze was both a blessing and a curse. The isolation offered peace, but at times it felt like a heavy shroud that suffocated him. He had anchored off a desolate stretch of coastline, a place his father had favored for its quiet waters and abundant catch. The small cabin was equipped with basic necessities: a small kitchen, a sleeping loft, and a bathroom that seemed to groan under the weight of every wave. As autumn set in, the fishing season began to dwindle. The mornings came with a chill that seeped into his bones, and the once bustling marina fell quiet, the other boats leaving for warmer shores. Alex found solace in the routine of fishing, but each evening, as he cleaned his catch, a nagging feeling settled in his gut, as if the sea itself was trying to tell him something. On one particularly bleak evening, as dark clouds rolled in, Alex noticed something unusual in the water, a shape that bobbed ominously just beneath the surface. It was too large to be debris, too dark to be a shadow cast by the stormy sky. Curiosity piqued, he leaned over the side of the boat, squinting into the murky depths. It vanished before he could make sense of it, leaving him with a creeping unease. Shaking off the feeling, he prepared his gear for the next day's fishing. He thought about how he could prove himself to his father's memory, how he needed to make this work, not just for himself but for the legacy of the family. But as he settled into bed that night, sleep eluded him, his mind racing with thoughts of the shape in the water. The following days blended into one another. The strange occurrence lingered in his mind, manifesting in restless dreams filled with swirling darkness and whispers he could not understand. The wind howled, and the waves seemed to crash against the boat with a fury he hadn't witnessed before. Each time he ventured out, he felt eyes watching him from below, a presence that made his skin crawl. One night, after a particularly long day of fishing with little to show for it, Alex sat on the deck, nursing a cold beer and staring at the stars. The water was eerily calm, the moonlight casting a silvery glow that danced across the surface. That's when he heard it, the soft sound of splashing, rhythmic and haunting. He froze, heart racing, listening intently. The sound grew louder, more insistent. It was as if something was moving just beneath the surface, circling the boat. He grabbed a flashlight and shone it into the water. For a moment, he thought he saw something, a flash of a pale face, eyes wide and unblinking, staring right back at him. He stumbled back, dropping the flashlight, which rolled across the deck and into the dark. "What the hell?" he muttered to himself, trying to shake the image from his mind. Panic surged, and he felt the urge to flee. He rushed inside the cabin, locking the door behind him, though he knew that didn't mean anything against whatever lurked outside. The whispers returned, echoing in his head, a chorus of lost souls begging for release. The next morning, Alex woke to the sound of rain tapping against the roof. The sky was overcast, a thick blanket of gray hanging over the ocean. He made himself a cup of coffee, trying to shake off the remnants of the previous night. He needed to go out and fish to assert control over his fear. The thought of staying inside, haunted by visions of the face in the water, was unbearable. As he cast his nets, the sea felt different, an undercurrent of tension coursing through the waves. Hours passed with little success, the fish seemingly avoiding his bait. He pulled up the nets repeatedly, frustration boiling inside him. And then, as he leaned over to check his gear, he caught sight of it again, the dark shape lurking just beneath the surface, always just out of reach. The days turned into weeks, and the weather grew more unpredictable. The winds howled like tortured spirits, and storms rolled in without warning. Each night, he heard the splashing, each time feeling more desperate, more convinced that something was wrong. He began to see the pale face more clearly in his mind, a visage that filled him with dread. One stormy evening, the boat rocked violently, the wind screaming like a banshee. Alex fought to secure his equipment, heart racing as he glanced over the edge of the boat. The water churned, a roiling mass that seemed alive. Suddenly, a wave crashed against the side, and he lost his footing, tumbling overboard into the icy depths. Cold shock enveloped him, and he struggled to swim back to the surface. Panic gripped him as he fought against the waves, his lungs screaming for air. Just as he thought he would drown, he broke the surface, gasping for breath. But the storm was merciless, pulling him under again and again, the water swirling around him like a living creature. In that chaotic moment, he saw her pale face staring back, eyes filled with a sadness that pierced through the storm. "Help me," she mouthed, her voice swallowed by the waves. He reached out instinctively, drawn to her as if by an invisible thread. He felt something tug at his leg, dragging him down. The shape beneath the surface was no longer just a shadow. It was a hand, skeletal and cold, grasping at him. The whispers grew louder, swirling around him like a tempest of despair. "Join us," they beckoned, the voices a haunting symphony of sorrow. With a surge of adrenaline, Alex kicked free from the grip and swam with all his might toward the boat. He could hear the figure beneath him, the plea for help ringing in his ears. He clambered back aboard, soaking wet and gasping, heart pounding in his chest. The storm raged, but he was alive, and for the moment, that was enough. That night, he barricaded himself inside the cabin, trembling as the winds howled outside. Sleep evaded him again, his mind a whirlwind of fear and confusion. As dawn broke, he decided it was time to leave. He couldn't stay here any longer, haunted by visions and voices. He packed his gear, ready to head back to the marina and sail the sea breeze. But as he prepared to cast off, he noticed something on the deck, an old photograph, faded and worn. He picked it up, heart sinking. It was a picture of his father, young and smiling, standing on the sea breeze. But behind him, a dark figure loomed just beneath the surface, its features indistinguishable, yet eerily familiar. The realization hit him like a wave. His father had never left. He had become part of the sea, tied to the boat and its history. The whispers, the face, it was all connected to the legacy of fishing, of those who had been lost. He felt a pull, a deep connection to the ocean that he couldn't ignore. The sea was alive, and it craved something from him. As he sat there, the whispers returned, but this time, they were softer, more comforting. "We're here," they murmured, a soothing lullaby in the chaos. "You are never alone." Alex hesitated, torn between fear and a strange sense of belonging. He looked back at the water, the storm having subsided into a gentle swell. The surface shimmered under the morning sun, inviting him. Could he truly leave it all behind? In that moment, he made a choice. Instead of fleeing, he dropped the anchor and prepared his gear once more. The sea had called to him, and for better or worse, he would answer. He would fish, he would listen, and perhaps one day, he would find peace with the whispers of the depths. As he cast his line into the water, he felt the weight of the past settle around him like a warm embrace. The silence beneath was no longer just a void. It was a connection, a reminder of all those who had come before. And as the sun rose higher in the sky, Alex knew he was exactly where he was meant to be. The albatross bobbed gently in the harbor, its hull worn but sturdy, a trusted vessel that had weathered many storms. For Sam, it was more than just a fishing boat, it was his sanctuary. After losing his job in the city and enduring a painful breakup, he had decided to return to his roots, to the sea where his father had spent most of his life. Sam had spent his childhood summers aboard the Albatross, learning the ins and outs of fishing from his father. The boat had a way of soothing his restless spirit, and he felt a pull to live on it for the summer, away from the noise of the city and the reminders of his failed relationships. He docked at a quiet marina on the outskirts of town, surrounded by the sounds of seagulls and the lapping of waves against the hull. Each morning, he rose with the sun, casting his nets and lines into the rich, blue waters of the Pacific. The catch was plentiful mackerel, halibut, and even the occasional tuna. It felt good to be back in the rhythm of the sea, the salt air invigorating his senses. But as the weeks wore on, an unsettling feeling began to creep in. The nights grew longer, and the deep silence of the ocean would settle in around him, sometimes broken only by the distant calls of seagulls or the haunting sound of the wind. During the day, the fishing was good, but at night, something felt off. One night, while he was cleaning his catch, he heard the faint sound of splashing. At first, he thought it was a fish, but the sound seemed too deliberate, too rhythmic. He paused, straining to listen. The splashing continued, growing louder and closer. Heart racing, he peered over the side of the boat into the inky water. Nothing. Just darkness. He shook off the unease, attributing it to fatigue. After all, he had been working hard and living alone for weeks. But the next night, it happened again. This time, it was accompanied by a whisper, a soft, almost melodic sound that sent shivers down his spine. "Help me," it seemed to say, a plea from the depths. Terrified yet intrigued, Sam began to wonder if he was losing his mind. The ocean had always held a kind of magic for him, but now it felt twisted, tainted by something dark and ignoble. As he lay in bed that night, he could hear the whispers more clearly, mingling with the sound of the waves, growing louder, more insistent. "Help us, come to us." Days turned into weeks, and Sam's sense of dread deepened. He stopped inviting friends to visit, retreating further into himself as he became consumed by the mystery of the splashes and whispers. Each night, he would try to drown them out with music or the radio, but the sounds persisted, echoing in the recesses of his mind. One evening, as he sat on the deck watching the sunset, he decided to investigate. Armed with a flashlight, he leaned over the side, peering into the darkness. The water rippled, and just below the surface, he thought he saw something in outline, shifting and gliding. He blinked, and it was gone. "Stop it, Sam," he muttered to himself, shaking his head. "You're just imagining things." But the weight of the whispers felt real, palpable, as if they were reaching out to him from the abyss. That night, he dreamt of the ocean. In his dreams, he was underwater, surrounded by shadows and shapes, struggling to swim to the surface. The whispers filled his ears, a cacophony of voices calling his name, begging him to join them. He awoke with a start, heart pounding, drenched in sweat. The next day, he decided to head into town. Perhaps some company would clear his mind. As he walked the streets, he found himself drawn to the local bar. It was filled with fishermen and locals, their laughter and stories a stark contrast to the loneliness he felt on the boat. But even as he chatted and drank, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him. Returning to the Albatross that night, the familiar dread washed over him. The moment he stepped onto the deck, he felt the air was thicker, charged with a strange energy. He set about cleaning his gear, but the whispers grew louder, swirling around him like a storm. "Help us, join us, get away from me," he shouted, his voice lost in the darkness. He rushed inside, slamming the door, his heart racing. The splashing resumed, a relentless sound that seemed to pulse in time with his heartbeat. Days passed, and the cycle continued. The fishing became less fruitful, and the whispers more demanding. Sam began to isolate himself further, avoiding contact with anyone, retreating into his own paranoia. He started to notice strange things, a fishing net that would go missing only to reappear, the cooler emptied of fish overnight, and the unmistakable feeling of being watched. One stormy night, as rain pelted the deck and thunder rumbled in the distance, he sat huddled in the cabin, a bottle of whiskey in hand. The whispers grew louder, crashing against him like the waves outside. Help us, you can't escape." In a fit of desperation, he grabbed his fishing gear and rushed out onto the deck, convinced he needed to catch whatever was tormenting him. He cast his line into the tumultuous waters, hoping to snare whatever spirit had claimed his peace. The rod bent violently, and he felt the tug, stronger than anything he had ever experienced. With adrenaline coursing through him, he reeled it in, muscles straining against the pull. As the creature broke the surface, Sam was struck with terror. It was unlike anything he had ever seen, a grotesque, misshapen figure. Its features twisted and contorted, with eyes that glimmered like the depths of the ocean. "Help me," it wailed, its voice echoing in the storm. Sam stumbled back, the horror of it gripping him as he tried to pull away. "Free us," it cried, its voice merging with the whispers of 1,000 souls. Overcome with panic, Sam cut the line and watched as the figure sank back into the darkness, swallowed by the waves. The storm raged on, and in that moment, the whispers ceased. The water fell silent, leaving him alone in the chaos. Breathless and shaken, Sam staggered back into the cabin, locking the door behind him. He sank to the floor, heart racing, replaying the horrifying vision in his mind. He felt a deep sense of loss and sorrow that enveloped him like a shroud. The weight of the ocean's grief pressed against his chest. As dawn broke, Sam resolved to leave the boat for good. He packed his belongings, ready to sever the ties that bound him to the albatross. But as he prepared to cast off, he felt an overwhelming sense of despair. The whispers returned, softer now, but still insistent. "Don't leave us, you belong to us." In that moment of conflict, he looked back at the water, the sun glistening on the surface. He couldn't shake the feeling that the ocean was alive, an entity that craved connection. With trembling hands, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn photograph of his father standing proudly on the albatross. "Dad," he whispered, tears stinging his eyes, "what do I do?" He closed his eyes, recalling the stories his father had told him about the sea tales of lost fishermen, the spirits of those who had gone before. In that moment, he understood. The whispers weren't just haunting him, they were calling to him, seeking understanding, seeking release. With a newfound sense of purpose, he cast the photograph into the water, watching as it floated on the surface, the current carrying it away. "I will remember you," he vowed. "I will honor you." The whispers grew softer, transformed from desperate pleas to a gentle song. The weight of grief that had filled the boat lifted, replaced by a serene calmness. The storm clouds dissipated, and sunlight broke through, illuminating the albatross. As he stood there, Sam felt a sense of peace wash over him. The shadows that had haunted him began to fade, leaving behind a quiet understanding of the bond between man and sea. He realized he wasn't alone. The spirits of the ocean were with him, guiding him through the darkness. From that day on, Sam continued to fish, but he approached it with a newfound respect for the waters. He would often sit on the deck, listening to the waves, knowing that the whispers were still their echoes of those lost, but no longer haunting. They had become a part of him, woven into the very fabric of his life. As the seasons changed, he kept the albatross alive, not just for himself but for the memory of his father and the countless souls that roamed the depths. And on quiet nights, when the moon hung low and the sea was calm, he would close his eyes and listen, letting the whispers guide him into a future where he truly belonged. Alright everyone, that brings us to the end of our story. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more content like this, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. And if you have similar stories you'd like to share with us, feel free to reach out. Thank you for watching, and until next time, take care.